Welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. I'm Lindsay Few, your podcast co-host, and in the studio with me today is Dr. Kim, the host of the Awesome Marriage Podcast. And today we're talking all about do's and don'ts for building emotional intimacy in your marriage. This is a topic that we have heard a lot of questions about, and people just don't know how to build it, how to retain it, and what's not working. So today we're going to unpack that. And we also want to help you out by offering you an awesome free resource we've created to help with this. Our goal, we are always working to create products that make this information practical for you and your spouse to apply. So if you'll stick with us through the end, I'll tell you all about that. But for now, Dr. Kim, let's get into it. So, Dr. Kim, let's talk about emotional intimacy. Will you start by just defining that term for us?
I think there's a lot of, technical things, but I really see emotional intimacy, especially when we're talking about a marriage relationship. It's an ability for where you can share your feelings, your thoughts, your vulnerabilities with your spouse in an atmosphere where there's trust and there's understanding, there's acceptance. You don't feel like you're going to be judged, that you feel their support, you feel their empathy, that it's really a safe place to connect and grow emotionally in your marriage relationship.
Yeah, and that sounds like what everyone really wants at marriage, just that connection, that acceptance. You can just be yourself and be real.
I agree. I can't imagine anybody on the day of their wedding not wanting that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we let all this stuff get in the way of achieving that. But I think it's something we all want, but that's deep within us. I think God puts that within us. I think it's what we want with Him. And since marriage is a reflection of Christ's relationship with the church, it's what we want with our spouse.
Yeah.
And they should be our safest place besides Jesus in our lives.
Right. Right. I love the vision and I love that idea. But yet at the same time, we know, and obviously as a seasoned marriage counselor, that is not always the reality. So let's see if we can figure out kind of how to prevent the breakdown and build this intimacy back up in marriages. So first of all, what do you see with couples as they come in for counseling? What happens when emotional intimacy is lacking in a marriage?
One thing I think they just don't feel, they might struggle to express their real feelings, their needs. They just don't feel like they can share that with their spouse. I think a lot of times they feel disconnected. One of the things that I saw early on when that's not there, that there's probably nothing more lonely than being in a marriage where those expectations were there and they're not happening. You can be together just in the same house, but if that connection isn't there, you're really missing out on a lot. I think that when that's not there, there's a vulnerability then for other things, emotional affairs, physical affairs, things like that. So I think that vulnerability ramps up when you don't have that in your marriage. Trust, I think, can erode over time. This person that you at one time maybe trusted, that you shared everything with, and now you feel like you can't. And so then you just don't have that emotional closeness that you wanted. And I think that sometimes then bleeds over and affects the physical intimacy. So there's so many negative things that happen when that is lacking in a marriage relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's funny because I've heard you mention the physical intimacy. I've always heard it said, I maybe in some premarital thing that, if your sex life is struggling, it's like a warning light on the dashboard. Something is going on that you can't see. And I think emotional intimacy is a great suspect for this problem. Breakdowns with that trust,
Absolutely.
that connection, that's definitely going to play into all those other areas.
It really is. Well, and we know we've talked in so much about the sex relationship, and certainly for a woman that it's in her mind. And man, if this isn't there for a wife, if she's not going to respond the way God created her to respond. And I think that's going to, for both of them to have what God really wants for a marriage, the gift of sex in marriage, to be everything God created it to be. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So we're going to get a little more specific in this conversation today. And I think this is going to be, might step on some toes, might help some people, might do all this at the same time. But I first want to talk about the wives, because I think wives maybe experience more of the feeling of desiring emotional intimacy. I'm not sure how it is for men, but I know for women, it's a common pain point that the husband just doesn't seem to want to connect. He doesn't seem to be intentional about deepening intimacy. So for women, it's often something that's kind of top of mind. We feel the lack of this a lot of the time. So let's start with the wives, because it's, we're familiar with this. What do wives tend to get wrong about emotional intimacy?
I think sometimes they push for it really too hard. And maybe
Hmm.
want to go in another episode, we talked about 5 levels of communication. They want to go to
Hmm.
that really vulnerable, deep, just right now. And it
Sure.
may take your spouse time to kind of get ready for that. Very few guys seem to have grown up in homes where they were able to, where they really understood emotional intimacy
Hmm.
and how that should play out in a marriage relationship. And so if your husband's working on it, just give him time to continue to do that. And I think too, when he finally does share, don't don't discourage him. Don't react in a negative way or criticize it, or that's not what I mean by being emotional intimate
Right.
with me, or things like that. You know,
Hmm.
give him. I think your role. I think because women are so much more relational in general than guys are, one of your roles is to help us get there. Now we
Hmm.
have the role of doing that, going through, being persevering through that, but you can certainly help your husband a lot by just being walking through that with him. One
Hmm.
thing that I have seen off and on, and I think we're getting better about this, but it used to seem like there were a lot of wives that felt like if their husband loved them, that they could read their minds, that they would know what you want and what you need. And I
Hmm.
promise you, after 4 years of marriage, you can't read your spouse's mind. Now, there's some
Yeah.
things that I can kind of think Nancy's thinking, and I obviously know her favorite ice creams and things like that,
Yeah.
but I can't read her mind. And so I think you set yourself for failure when when you put that on your spouse. He's just not
Yeah.
going to naturally know what to do. And that's why it's so important for you to be able to share with him your thoughts on emotional intimacy, what you need in that,
Hmm.
what your vision is for the two of you in your marriage relationship. So those are a few things that came to my mind.
Yeah, those are really good. I think you're right. There's like that pushing piece that can even turn into nagging or criticizing. You never do this, or complaining.
Yeah.
You never do this for me. Why don't you do this? And and I think that a lot of times you're right. They don't the husband doesn't even necessarily know what she's asking for at all. And so it's pretty vague, it's pretty
Right.
unclear, and that is frustrating. Yeah, cuz sometimes it can just be kind of vague, it can be criticism or complaints, but also really guilty as charged with the mind reading situation. I've shared this before, but I grew up with a dad who it seemed like he could read my mom's mind. It really did. Now that I'm older,
Mm,
I've seen the other side. I know it's not true, but it seemed like he could. And so I thought that that was a normal thing. That was the only marriage I'd ever lived in the same house with.
yeah.
So I thought, if Brian loves me, he should understand all these things. And I didn't even think about the fact that they had already been married for however many years, and they'd put in a lot of time getting to know
Yeah.
each other. That as a newlywed couple, we did not have that experience, and I expected that, and woo, that was a train wreck.
Yeah, and I guess that's pretty normal, because
Hmm.
we equate that, but and I think that's before we really understand the differences in men and women. And I think a lot
Hmm.
of times we think our spouse thinks like we think. So
Hmm.
for a woman, that he's going to understand my emotions, because he thinks that way too. He feels that
Hmm.
way. For guys, it's like they look at sex exactly like we do.
Right.
That we just have certain assumptions that we go
Yeah.
into that can cause some problems in marriage. And so it's um, it's being willing to share those things that you
Yeah.
want and need for your husband, and
Yeah.
then for to understand where he is, and to be able to be patient with his as he works on being able to be more emotionally intimate with you.
Yeah. That's such a good point because yeah, you're right. Those assumptions really get us in trouble and we really don't know the depth of those differences before marriage. I mean, even if you have, good guy
Mhm.
friends or if you have brothers or something like that, you just haven't had to confront it at this level. One thing that we've created at Awesome Marriage that I love for this specific topic is it's called Questions to Help Your Spouse Open Up. It's a resource we created kind of for this topic where one spouse is really desiring that deeper
Yeah.
connection, but they feel like they're nagging, they're not sure where to start. But the beautiful thing about this is it starts with kind of examining your own self to see if you're doing some behaviors in marriage that are actually shutting your spouse down or not allowing that. And so it's a very active resource for both spouses. They both kind of have some work to do, but it's going to work to really help that connection a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just like anything else that's worthwhile in marriage. It doesn't just happen.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and to know that working on it is worth it because of what
Yeah.
the results you're going to get.
Yes. Absolutely. And instead of, thinking your spouse is a terrible husband or a terrible person or not, wasn't assembled correctly in the factory. Like, just to understand that they're just different. They don't see things the same way you do. And so we can't make those hurtful assumptions about each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said about your dad, I think that can be common. Like you expecting Brian to know what he knew. So if you have a good dad, good mom, your spouse didn't. Well, one, you don't want them to be exactly like that anyway.
Right.
But two, it's the experience. It's living together. It's learning about you. It's doing life together that gets you to that point where you saw the things that you saw in your dad. He probably
Mhm.
didn't do me better than Brian the first year of their marriage.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't around
Yeah.
then. I couldn't tell you.
No,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So we've given the wives some food for thought, but what can wives be doing for better emotional intimacy? We kind of touched on some, but are there any more specific tips for them?
Yeah, I think you want to really listen to him when he speaks and let him know that you're paying attention to him. Don't interrupt him. Don't offer solutions. Just let him talk,
Okay.
because that's the way I think as guys we're going to learn to do that. Express, let him know that you are thankful for his efforts and that he is working on that.
Hmm.
Encourage him in that. When he does talk about feelings, don't judge him.
Hmm.
Support him in that. And I think one way that Nancy did for me, and she still can do, is just ask open-ended questions about his
Hmm.
thoughts and dreams and concerns. Don't say, "You have any dreams?" And he's going to say what? He's going to say yes or no, And if instead of saying, "Hey, tell me about the dreams you have for us in 5 years," or tell me what are your thoughts about what our life is going to be when the kids are gone, or those
Hmm.
kind of things where you have an open-ended question, which means it can't be answered with a yes or no, something like
Hmm.
that. And do understand that we talked a little bit about that, but there are different emotions and we express them differently. And
Hmm.
so he's not going to probably ever express them exactly like you. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean he doesn't have them. And so
Yeah.
being able that, and I think just letting the emotional intimacy develop gradually and
Hmm.
not trying to force it, that will be huge. Because like you said, if it gets to where a husband feels like his wife is nagging, well, that just puts a black cloud over it
Yeah.
that sometimes it's hard to get rid of.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
you want to walk with your husband, just like anything else we talk about. You got to walk together. You're a team doing this. See it
Hmm.
as a team deal and be his biggest cheerleader as he goes through
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to land on too, because I know one thing that as a woman, I don't really understand, but I know that the idea of feeling respected in your marriage is really big for guys, just in general. And so I think maybe
Hmm.
speaking to that and sort of building that in and kind of say, maybe create an atmosphere where you can say, hey, how am I doing with this? Ma- do you feel respected by the way I communicate with you? Are there ways that that's not really working right now? That could be a little bit of an inroad to this, because once you get into the nagging and criticizing, that's going to undermine all of that. And he's going to feel so disrespected. He's not going to
Yeah.
want to open up.
Yeah, and it is. It can just, if he's trying and he's working on it, and he's not doing it at
Hmm.
the pace you want, but then you start nagging about it, he's going to just say it's not worth it. I'm never going to get there.
Right.
I'm just
Yeah.
never going to get there. I thought I was doing pretty good. I knew I wasn't a 10,
Right.
but I thought I was at least at a 5 now,
Yeah.
and I don't think I can do this. So he shuts down.
Man, that's such a good point. Just acknowledge and celebrate the change, even if it's small. We don't start at the end. We
Right?
start somewhere. And so that's a great thing to see that there is that intent
No.
and that desire to grow. That's awesome.
Yeah,
So
marriage is a
you
marathon, and
yes.
so treat it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just keep chugging away. Keep chugging away. Slow progress is progress. And that is good to
Hmm.
remember. So you shared about Nancy
Yes.
asking good, open ended questions. Are there any other ways that Nancy has really helped facilitate emotional intimacy in your marriage?
I think even when we were dating, I saw something in her. She was my safe place. I talked about
Mm,
things, even in dating, as we got engaged, that I'd never talked about with a woman before. And I,
mm,
I was thinking about this yesterday. I can't remember any time that I ever shared anything to Nancy that she judged me. I don't ever
mm,
remember any time that I shared something
hmm,
that she that she judged it or made me feel bad about it, or I didn't feel like that she didn't listen to me or whatever, that she, yeah. And I think for things that she's done to help, she initiates those kind of conversations more than I do. And she asks really good open-ended questions. She's great at that.
Mm-hmm.
She will not let me get by with a fine or yeah, or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. She
Mm-hmm.
really asks good questions. And it's still, I think, not as, I don't know, it's as I'm not as good at it as she is,
Hmm.
of emotional intimacy. I think I'm good at it. I think being a counselor has helped me be that. Being married to her has helped me that. But I also think there's things that I still can learn. And
Mm-hmm.
by her continuing to walk with me, ask those kind of questions, be a safe place, I'm going to continue to grow in that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. Those are great. I mean, she's so wise. She's just so wise.
I know. I know. It's just sickening sometimes how wise she is. No, uh, it's not. It's a blessing.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and you get to benefit from it. So there you go.
Yes, absolutely.
So good. So, okay, let's turn our attention to the husbands now. We got to start off with the hard stuff. What do husbands tend to get wrong about emotional intimacy?
I think we just like everything else. We think sex solves everything. So I think we assume sex alone creates deep and emotional connection, and it doesn't by itself. And so I think that's a thing that we have to realize that, well, she wants emotional intimacy. She wants intimate. We forget about the emotional part and we think she wants intimacy. So we'll have sex and bingo, I've done that. Now, I think for us wanting to be the guy, to be strong, that we've got to get past that, and be willing to share our fears or insecurities, and not
Hmm.
feel like that with our wife that we have to have this persona of this
Hmm.
manly man that doesn't have any feelings or emotions, because we do. And God put your wife in your life to become the safe place where you can learn to share those and develop them.
Hmm.
Um, and I think sometimes as guys, we want to fix things rather than listening and empathizing. And we've been married probably 10 years. When Nancy said, we were talking about, she was sharing something with me, and I was listening, and then I just said, well, why don't you do this, this, and this? And she goes, okay, I'll let you know when I want you to fix it. Right now, I just
Yeah.
want you to listen to me. And so
Yeah.
that was kind of our deal from that time on. And it's like, if she wants, so I just let her talk. And if she wants me to help her with a solution or to help her fix it, then she asked me to do that. I think that's been a huge thing for us, is me getting past that, trying to fix it, because I always
Mm.
thought I could fix it. And it wasn't because out of my ego. I don't think it was because I wanted to help her. I said, okay,
Hmm.
you've got this problem. Well, this is what you do, and be okay. Well, one, my answers weren't always going to work in her situation. She's
Right.
different than me. And so it was learning just to listen. So I think we've got to learn to do that as guys,
Hmm.
and not fix it and move on. I think probably those are the main things. Learning to articulate our feelings, I think, is important, but I think our wives can help us do that with open-ended questions, things like that. So I think those are the main things that I see that husbands really struggle with. And of course, just getting to the point of accepting, talking about my feelings and emotional needs really is important. It's important to her, it's important to our marriage, and it's important to me.
Hmm.
And I think prayer, asking God to help you in that area, is gonna help a lot, because God gave
Yeah.
you all those feelings. He didn't give feelings and emotions to women that He didn't give to men. He gave
Right.
us the same feelings and emotions, and so it just changes your life when you get in touch with that, and you're willing
Mm.
to grow in that area with your wife, and not just
Hmm.
expect her to carry that load in the marriage. That no, that's a burden, not a burden. It's something you carry together.
Hmm. That is such an interesting way you just put that God didn't give different emotions to women than to men, because I think that we're used to kind of viewing it that way almost. We're used to saying, "Oh, women are more emotional and men," and I've heard studies. I forget the name. You might know who this is, but there's a researcher or scientist who wrote a book about this. Permission to Feel is the name of the book. But he cites a study, or he may have done the study, that showed that most people are familiar with three emotions: happy, sad, mad. That's it. And it's not because they're not feeling the other emotions. It's just because they have not figured out how to name them and experience, the nuances of what's different between each one. They're not having different feelings. They might, manifest very differently or express
Mhm.
differently, but you just haven't taken the time yet to understand and learn about them. And so I think that's such a good point to point out, because I think women often get a stereotype of being more emotional, or maybe some guys are, oh, it's an emotional guy. No, we're all emotional. We're just not all in touch with them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think as guys, just as an aside, I think with those three, it's so easy for a guy to turn to anger because it's safe.
Hmm.
You feel more in control. It's a lot more than acknowledging maybe a more vulnerable emotion
Hmm.
that you're having at that time. And so I think for a guy, there's a thing called the anger wheel, and anybody can
Mm.
Google it and see it. But it kind of shows what are the emotions that are behind anger, and how
Hmm.
as guys, it's usually, I think, probably guys more than women, we go to anger because we don't want to acknowledge those others, or we just
Right.
ignore those others. And so
Yes.
and so we get stuck with happy, sad, mad,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's enough, we think.
Well,
But there's so much more to what God gave us, so much more.
that's a really good point. And the emotions, the anger wheel, I've never heard of that, but I need to Google that today, because I do live with three teenage boys. And it's,
Yes.
it's a relevant topic. I'm just saying. But also,
Yes.
we do have a free feelings wheel that we've created at Awesome Marriage for this purpose, because I mean, it's not
Yeah.
something that most people are walking around doing. Most people are just going, oh, I'm mad. Oh, I'm frustrated. Oh, it sucks. And it's like, okay, we can't really do anything with that. But if you start to say, I felt embarrassed. Oh my gosh, your wife's going to be like, you had a
Yeah.
feeling. We can connect. I understand. She's going to be jumping up and down. And so I think we'll definitely put the link to our free feelings wheel in the show notes. And I just want to encourage you that if it feels silly to use, that's okay. Just have fun with it. If it needs to
Yeah.
be silly, make it silly. But the process of starting to break those things down can bring a lot of freedom, because it's a lot easier to connect with somebody who's sharing an authentic feeling than somebody who's just kind of stomping around displaying an unpacked, a feeling they're not really aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I just Googled up the anger wheel, and
Hmm.
because it just maybe go a little more into it, because some of the things that it shows, and that we go to anger instead of feeling fear or
Mm.
shame or guilt or hurt.
Hmm.
That those kind of things, which as guys sometimes I don't want to say you hurt me, and
Right.
so instead I get angry,
Right.
or I feel guilty about this, but I don't really want to deal with that. So I'm gonna get
Hmm.
angry. And so I think as guys, it helped me a lot to realize, oh my gosh, there's so much behind the anger
Oh my
that we
gosh.
have, and
Yeah.
learning to identify what that is and deal with that makes all the difference in the world. And so if you have an anger problem, getting
Hmm.
to understand what's behind that is going
Hmm.
to be a big step toward dealing with that anger.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's huge. I think that's
And
going to
that's
be
just a
really,
bonus for listening to the podcast today.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I didn't even know that existed. So it's a bonus for me too. No, that's really good. And so we've given a few really good free resources that you can use to start dealing with this stuff. Let's talk about what husbands can do to improve emotional intimacy. If your wife is going, hey, I want to connect better, I want more emotional intimacy, what does she mean? How can you start doing it?
Yeah, I think you just start. I mean, I think you take that first step. You said you can feel uncomfortable at first, but share a thought, share a feeling. Maybe even during the day, if you have something like that, just jot it down and share it with her when you
Mm,
get home that evening. Or,
hmm.
just getting in the habit of say, hey, I'm going to share one feeling with my wife every day that I have during the day, and
Hmm.
just start at whatever, at a baby step. But I think once you do and you realize, hey, this worked, then you can start. You're kind of renewing your mind in that area. You're
Hmm.
beginning to think about things and experience things that you haven't. And I think once you do, I think you'll feel the results of this. Feels pretty good that I was able to say that. And it feels pretty good the way my wife responded to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel closer to her, and she seems to feel closer to me because I did that. So, and I think just kind of to follow up on the fixing things, just really listen to her. Don't try to solve the problem. Be willing to express any fears or doubts. I think sometimes as guys, we hold things in. I've had so many people over the years that the guy knew the company was doing some layoffs. He knew that he might be next in line, but he held all that in. And he either came out when Joe got cut instead of him, and he just kind of, the wife says, "What is different? You look like a different person today, and you've been holding it in the whole time." Or you're the one who gets cut, and then you come home and your wife thinks, "Wow, why did that happen today?" And instead of letting her walk through, pray for that with you, walk through that with you. And so, I think that's really important, is to learning to your team and everything. She is the helpmate that God gave you to walk through life with. And that's a huge role for her. I mean, God refers him to himself as a helper. Giving a wife as a helpmate is a huge role for a woman to play in our lives, and to let them play that. Yeah, and I think just being willing to don't play a game with your wife when she starts asking open-ended questions. Just go through, answer those well. I think some other things that guys that we can do, because we equate intimacy and sex so much, regularly giving our wives hugs or holding her hand or touch without the expectation of anything else happening. I think that gives a freedom to our wives that we want them to have. We don't want them to think every time we touch them that okay, he's wanting sex, that he's doing that and he's connecting with me. And there's joy. I mean, I love holding her hand, and I love cuddling with her. I love doing those things. And I think sometimes as guys, we don't embrace how important those are and how much they can mean to us, just like they mean to our wife. And so I think that's important too. I think those are probably some of the main things, and just keeping her informed of things, and then kind of beginning to articulate your emotions. There's a lot of different things out there with feelings charts. One in my office is kind of a flip chart, and I got it kind of for kids. I've got a guy that comes in. Man, the first thing he does is pick up that chart and he flips to where he is that day. And it's so cool. One, he's learning to identify those emotions. And two, it's kind of a springboard for us to, okay, this is what we're going to talk about today. And so I think those kind of things are all very helpful too. And so just knowing that you can improve your emotional intimacy, and a lot of it, yes, will be a stretch. Some of the things will get easier as you go on, but I think you'll see the difference. I think you'll see your wife just think, who is this guy? And I thought I liked the other guy a lot, but I really like this guy because he's talking emotional stuff to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you're able to meet each other there, and that's true connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, Dr. Kim, as you're talking about these different resources, and I've mentioned a few that we have as well, but these exist because a lot of people struggle with this. So if you're struggling, you are far from alone. This is a really common issue for individuals and for couples. And so just take heart, because it doesn't come easily for a whole lot of us. Many of us have not seen this modeled. We have no idea where to start. So if you feel like that today, don't be discouraged. Just know there's room to grow. And so that's great. If you're interested in taking those steps, husbands, if you're going to take any steps towards more intentionality in your marriage, your wife is going to be so happy. Wives, if you're going to take any steps to just let him approach emotional intimacy in his way, that he's going to be so happy. So I think there's a lot of growth we can get here. And I just want to leave you really encouraged with that today.
Yeah. That is so true. It is something that I think all of us deal with at some point or other. They wouldn't have written all those books. They wouldn't make all these charts if we didn't all deal with it. And so, one thing I was thinking of is I've had so many couples tell me that we'll be talking on what they want in their marriage. And a lot of time we are working on emotional intimacy. That might be the presenting problem, but that's something I want them to learn because their communication is going to be such an important part of their healing in their marriage. But we'll talk about family of origin. We'll talk about their parents, and how many times I hear about parents. I can't believe my parents are still together. They live separate lives. Some days I don't even think they talk. And, and their parents are 80 years old and a 60 year old, 70 year old, whatever it is. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm glad you see that's not what you want, but I feel so sorry for your
Mhm.
parents that at some point along the line, they didn't make the decision to deal with this.
Right.
What we're talking about today, you've got a chance to do something about that if this is an issue for you. So don't pass this up. Let this be a springboard to saying, we're going to get this right in our marriage. We're going to start working on it. We're going to keep working on it and let God build something beautiful in that area of our marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great place to start. Well, Dr. Kim, I had you brag on Nancy. Are there any ways that you have done well with cultivating the intimacy in your marriage?
Oh, I think the more vulnerable I have, I can just see it in her, as
Mhm.
I would be able to do that because I think my dad was pretty good about sharing emotions. My parents were really the model for awesome marriage. So
Mhm.
they did everything perfect. They did a lot of things right. So I had kind of the example there, but I also grew up with the Marlboro Man, who some people may know and others may not know, but he was this
Mhm.
big cowboy everybody wanted to be like him. Of
Oh,
course, he
yeah.
smoked cigarettes and
Mhm.
anyway, that part of it was not what we were looking at. It was like, golly. And so I had this deal, and even I love the stuff, the heroes that I had growing up, but I looked at some of the cowboys and other people that I liked growing up. I didn't really hear many of them express their emotions. So it really was not modeled as much for us as guys.
Mhm.
And so getting rid of that label, I think, was good for me that men do share emotions.
Mhm.
And when I did, that she accepted what I said. And so that
Mhm.
all of those things were just big turning points. And I think the other thing that I've done for her is, I kind of alluded to earlier, is learning to listen to her and not try to fix things. I think that's
Mhm.
been huge for our marriage. It's let her express herself more. It's helped me see what she really does want and need in that situation. And I
Mhm.
think that's connected us in a lot of conversations, just learning to do that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, that's really good. That's great. And that transition from, kind of looking at that tough, rugged Marlboro Man he's not gonna have a feeling. He's not gonna have any of those. And, kind of letting go of that and moving into this more
No.
emotional, healthy, a real person, not just a character. That's gonna be so healthy.
Oh yeah, and I was such a big into cowboys, and cowboys would they'd show more emotion to their horse than they would to their wife or the
Yeah.
other people in their lives. So
That's funny.
anyway, and if you don't know who the Marlboro Man is, just Google it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes my references may miss, but
That's really funny.
it was
I
something a
love
lot of
that
guys
too.
identified with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you said the horse.
Yeah, it's true.
I know.
Golly,
I
you
know.
know,
I know. I mean, it makes me
yeah.
think of how when my boys are like really amped up, they can just go like pet the dog, pet the dog and just melt. They're just like so sweet and soft and it's like, okay, you do have a softer side. It just the humans aren't getting to see it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think it's because those free relationships are blessings that God gave us, but they're
Yeah.
safe. Your
Yeah.
horse it's going to love. It's going to come up to you. It's going to nudge you with its head,
Yeah.
to show affection. And the dog's going to get in your lap and love it when you pat their belly. And
Mhm.
you think, why won't my wife let me pat her belly? And you're thinking
Right.
about all this stuff,
Right.
and so they're safe. The pets
Yeah.
are safe, and
Yeah.
yet we got to accept that and enjoy that, and then we got to also do these things with our spouse also.
Yeah. That's funny. Things I did not know would be part of this conversation, but
No.
oh, that's good. Well, Dr. Kim, this has been a really helpful conversation. A lot of good takeaways from this conversation on emotional intimacy. Do you have any final piece of advice for our listeners today?
It's such an important piece of a marriage relationship. And I would just encourage you to take step one, whatever it is. If you're a wife, think about things we talked about that maybe you were doing wrong and
Mm,
focus on the things that you can do for your spouse. And the guy's the same thing. What are you doing wrong? Sex isn't going to solve everything. You want that to be a part of it. And honestly, if you grow your emotional intimacy, your sex life will be better. I just count on it.
hmm
Email me if it isn't. And then just so what can you improve? What's the first little step you can take? And just sharing one thing a day can make a big difference. And so working on together, and I would talk about it. Let's say, hey, let's both work on this and let's both see if we can take this, maybe evaluate on the 1 to 10 where it is today. Maybe you're
hmm
one. Okay, let's go. What would take a get to a 3? Don't say, if you're a 1, don't go to 10, because that's going to
Right.
frustrate both of you. But what's it take to get to 2 or 3, and begin to make those steps and encourage each other in the process, pray about it together, and let God guide you into something that's really a beautiful thing for your marriage.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. There's a step to take wherever you are today. There's a step to take. And
Yes.
on that note, I've mentioned a few helpful resources we have. We talked about the feelings chart, the anger wheel, the questions to help your spouse open up. I also want to mention a specific targeted resource for this problem, which is 5 days to deeper emotional intimacy. And this is just a really practical process to making emotional intimacy happen. If you feel like I just have no idea where I want to start, I have no idea what to do, this challenge walks you through it. And so that's a resource we have available at awesomemarriage.com. Of course, it will be in the show notes today. But if you're not quite ready to give 5 days, we also have just a simple game you can play. It's called the Heart to Heart Married Couples Card Game. It gives you questions to open up, to deepen your emotional intimacy. And that is a freebie that we have for you. That is available also at today's show notes. So there's plenty of great starting places wherever you are today. We just encourage you to take that step. Thanks so much for spending time with us today. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.